Hi everyone and welcome to the next episode of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system. The customary quote. To avoid losing a piece, many a person has lost the game. From Savali Tatakover. A brief review of the last part where we went through games number 25, 26 and 27 of the illustrative game section of the book as advised by Nimzowitsch at the end of chapter 1. The conception of position play and the problem of the center, part 2 of the book, position play. So now, moving further into the book, we will go through game number 28 of the illustrative game section of the book as recommended by Nimzowitsch. This game was played between KLINE versus Jose Raul Capablanca in the American National Tournament in 1913 at New York, USA. KLINE was an American chess player who played in the first half of the 20th century. Nimzowitsch writes of the game as following. The following game illustrates the plan of action, center file versus flank attack. KLINE with the white pieces and Capablanca with the black. Notes by Aron Nimzowitsch. d4, knight f6, knight f3, d6, c3, knight d7, bishop f4, c6, queen c2, queen c7, e4, e5, bishop g3 and bishop e7. Where Nimzowitsch writes, White has now the attacking position in the center. This is unquestionably an advantage. But here, the weakness of his pawn at e4. We shall quickly see why e4 is weak. Will soon force White to surrender this advantage. That is to say, he will find himself obliged to equalize with d takes on e5. Bishop d3, castling, knight d2, rook e8, castling, knight h5, in order to exchange the bishop, knight c4, bishop f6, knight e3, knight f8, and d takes on e5. Since the bishop is needed at d3 for the protection of the e-pawn, the d-pawn can only be protected against a knight at e6 by exchanging the pawn. The student should consider carefully the motive here used, aimed at forcing the opponent to declare himself, whether for d takes on e5 or for d5. So d takes on e5, d takes on e5, bishop h4, queen e7, bishop takes on f6, queen takes on f6, knight e1, and knight f4, question mark. Nimzowitsch writes, with this move, a diversion is put on train, which may be said to run counter to the spirit of the opening. The right line of play consisted in bishop e6 instead, and doubling the rooks in the d file. By this means, the advantage could have been taken of the rather uncomfortable position of White's bishop at d3. Black's simplest course would have been to play bishop e6 on his 14th move here. So knight f4, g3, knight h3 check, king h1, h5, knight g2, g5, f3, knight g6, knight e3, h4, and g4, double question mark. Nimzowitsch writes, the entry of the knight at f5 would, according to my analysis, have decided the game in White's favor. The retreat of the black knight at h3 is cut off here. The attempt at a rescue undertaken by means of a reckless advance of the kingside pawns gives the opportunity often occurring in such a position for a decisive counterstroke by an invasion in the center, in the present case by knight f5 instead of g4. For instance, knight f5, h takes on g3, h takes on g3, bishop takes on f5, e takes on f5, knight e7, king g2, king g7, or is the pawn sacrifice g4, f takes on g4 and knight g5 any better? So king g7, king takes on h3, rook h8 check, or knight d5 and queen e2. So rook h8 check, king g2, queen h6, king f2, queen h2 check, knight g2, rook h3, king e1, rook takes on g3, knight e3, and so on. Moreover, as a superabundance, rook h1 here instead of king takes on h3 is also playable, which I showed to be a win for white in an analysis I published in the Riga Rundschau, a German language daily newspaper. But g4 was played by white in the game, and play continued with knight f4. Now the knight rejoices in their rediscovered freedom, and black, after his doubtful excursion, which could easily have ended fatally for him, takes up the right line, play in the d file, and pursues it with complete mastery to victory. What remains needs but few remarks. The continuation was rook f2, knight takes on d3, knight takes on d3, bishop e6, rook d1, rook d8, b3, knight f4, knight g3, knight takes on d3, rook takes on d3, rook takes on d3, queen takes on d3, and rook d8. Why not a bishop takes on g4 instead? So rook d8, queen e2, h3, knight e3, a5, rook f1, a4, c4, rook d4, knight c2, rook d7, knight e3, queen d8, rook d1, rook takes on d1 check, knight takes on d1, and queen d4. D-file and centralization. Knight f2, b5, c takes on b5, a takes on b3, a takes on b3, and bishop takes on b3, threatening queen a1 check. Knight takes on h3, bishop d1, queen f1, c takes on b5, king g2, b4, queen b5, b3, queen e8 check, king g7, queen e7, b2, knight takes on g5, bishop b3, and black wins. Next is game number 29 of the illustrative game section. This game was played between AKIBA Rubinstein versus Grigory Levenfish in 1911 at the Karlsbad tournament in Karlsbad or Karlovy Vary, present-day Czech Republic. Grigory Levenfish was a strong Soviet chess player who played prominently in the first half of the 20th century. He was awarded the International Grandmaster title in 1950 by FIDE. Nimzowitsch writes of the game as following. The next game illustrates the plan of action. Play in a file against the enemy center. First restrain, then blockade, and lastly destroy. Rubinstein with the white pieces and LEVENFISH with the black. Notes by Aron Nimzowitsch. d4, e6, e4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, e5, knight d7, bishop takes on e7, queen takes on e7, queen d2, castling, f4, c5, knight f3, and f6. Where Nimzowitsch writes, it would be more in the spirit of a correct attack on a pawn chain first to play c takes on d4, knight takes on d4, and not till then f6. But after f6, e takes on f6 and queen takes on f6, the position arrived at is after all similar to that of the text. So f6, e takes on f6, queen takes on f6, g3, knight c6, castling long, a6, bishop g2, and knight b6. Nimzowitsch comments, the diagonal attacking range g2 to d5 is a necessary element in white's plan of operations. For this, after e takes on f6, holds up the freeing thrust e5 better than any other disposition could. Rook e1, knight c4, queen f2, b5, and d takes on c5. Bravo! The flank attack knight takes on b2 has no terrors for him, since the flank attack by itself can never ruin a strongly centralized game, and white's game is centralized, for he holds the center files, and pressure in them is already making itself felt, and further he has the prospect of occupying the central points d4 and e5. Observe now how black's wing attack is thrown back by action in the center. Knight takes on b2, king takes on b2, b4, knight d4, bishop takes, b takes on c3 check, and king a1. Where Nimzowitsch remarks, black c-pawn will be gobbled up presently by a rook. Knight takes on d4. If instead bishop d7, then knight takes on e6, bishop takes on e6, and rook takes on e6, followed by bishop takes on d5. So knight takes on d4, queen takes on d4, rook b8, rook e3, and g5. Now he has a go on the other wing. Rook takes on c3, g takes on f4, bishop, g takes on f4, bishop d7, c6, queen takes on d4, rook takes on d4, bishop e8, bishop h3, rook f6, and c7. Nimzowitsch writes, it would have pleased me even better if the decision had been brought about in a bishop ending instead of through the somewhat tacked on action of the passed pawn at c7. For instance, from such a position as shown on board, with the continuation f5. E takes on f5, bishop takes on f5, and white wins the d pawn and the game. We should then have the general idea more markedly brought out, namely first to keep the e and d pawn under restraint, then to blockade them and only at the end destroy them. But as played, the game was instructive enough. For example, moves 13, 16 and 18 of the game. So c7, rook c8, rook takes on d5, rook c7, and bishop takes on e6 check, where black resigned the game. Next is game number 30 of the illustrative game section. This game was played between EFIM BOGOLJUBOV versus Aron Nimzowitsch in 1927 at the London tournament in London, England. EFIM BOGOLJUBOV was a Russian-born German chess player who played prominently in the first half of the 20th century. He played 2 matches against Alexander Alekhine for the World Championship and was awarded the International Grandmaster title in 1951 by FIDE. Nimzowitsch writes of the game as following. The following game is instructive for the way in which black turns his majority in the center to account despite disturbing countermeasures. Bogoljubov with the white pieces and Nimzowitsch with the black. Notes by Aron Nimzowitsch. c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, e4 and c5, where Nimzowitsch comments, since e5 did not seem to be dangerous. g3. There was also to be considered knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes on d4, knight takes on d4, bishop e4, and queen d3, Bogoljubov's suggestion. But g3 was played in the game and play continued with d5, e5, d4, e takes on f6, d takes on c3, and d takes on c3. Nimzowitsch writes, an interesting idea. He, so to speak, sacrifices a pawn in that he makes his pawn majority on the queen side of no value, but he hopes, occupying certain central points, to be able to bring counter pressure to bear. See next note. Queen takes on f6, knight f3, h6, bishop g2, bishop d7, and knight d2. Nimzowitsch remarks, white's command of the diagonal g2 to b7 coupled with that of the point e4 is no small embarrassment to black. If now queen e5 check question mark, then knight e4 and bishop f4 next move. Bishop c6, knight e4, queen g6, queen e2, and bishop e7. Not f5 because of the reply bishop f3 followed by knight d2 and e5. Apologies, e5 over here will remain a weak point for black. So bishop e7, castling, castling, and h4. An ingenious move, which however brings about a disturbance of the equilibrium which up to now may be said to have existed. Better was f4, knight d7, bishop d2, king h8, rook e1, knight f6, and bishop c1. After the text move h4, the balance sways in black's favor. f5, knight d2, and bishop takes on g2. Not bishop takes on h4 because of knight f3. So bishop takes on g2, king takes on g2, knight c6, knight f3, and f4. Otherwise, bishop f4 and the balance is readjusted. So f4, rook e1, rook f6, and queen e4. The game is already lost for white for the occupation of the point e4, which seems to consolidate the position, proves to be deceptive. g3 is in fact sick unto death. F takes on g3, f takes on g3, bishop d6, g4, queen takes on e4, rook takes on e4, rook f8, rook e3, rook f4, and g5. Nimzowitsch writes, rook takes on e6 instead, rook takes on g4 check, king f2 and knight e5 would lead to a debacle or fiasco for white. So g5, rook g4 check and king h1, or king f2, knight e5, king e2, rook g2 check, king f1, rook g3, winning a piece for black. So king h1, h takes on g5, h takes on g5, king f7, and knight g1. If instead g6 check, then king f6, not king e7 because of knight h2, rook h8, rook e2, rook h4, double question mark, bishop g5 check. So knight g1, rook h8 check, knight h3, king e7, b3, bishop f4, rook f3, and knight e5, where white resigned the game. Alright, we conclude this part of Aron Nimzowicz's My System here. We shall continue onwards from the next part and begin the next chapter, the doubled pawn and restraint, which is chapter 2 of the second part of the book, Position Play. Here is a look at the recent channel support from my Twitch stream. Some new supporters: Earlycc, Awful Waffle, and Nate Brady 23. Nate Brady is Nathan Brady, a fellow chess streamer from the US. I will post a link to his stream in the video description. Do check him out. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Alright, till next time, take care.